Welcome to the Sketchy Podcast. This is the first podcast ever of Sketchy Podcast, and there is only a few episodes that you ever get to have a first with. And you know what? I've done podcasting for a number of years, and there are few chances I get at this. So let me just welcome you to the first episode, dear listener. Welcome.
Feels like the first time.
It is the first time, yeah. And like all first times, like all of your cherries are about to be popped simultaneously. So I'm just gonna take my time with you, babies.
All right, we're less than a minute in. We've offended everybody.
Well, that's the point of Sketchy.
Ooh, tell me more.
Sketchy is a very offensive idea. I'm fully on board with the idea that we should offend people.
I think sketchy is a noble idea and a very offensive implementation.
Right? It was a high-minded idea at the end of the day. It was all about trying to promote ideas like free speech and the need for artists to express themselves in an environment without fear of repercussions or retribution.
The duty of artists to further society and challenge our viewpoints.
Right. I mean, art has to be subversive in order for it to be useful for us. It has to challenge our views, challenge society, challenge powerful institutions and individuals. But in the process of doing this, there is no guarantee that we're going to be civil about it or that we're going to be high-minded about it.
I think we can guarantee we won't be civil, actually.
If you look at the name, Sketchy, it says a lot, you know. When you think about...
A little bit sketchy.
It's a little bit sketchy. And really, when we talk about every single topic that we're ever going to mention on the Sketchy Podcast, there is a underlying sketchiness to it all. So
right. How do we decide what to talk about on Sketchy?
I guess that you could describe Sketchy as being a bit of a piece of me. So everything that bothers me or that bugs me, we're going to talk about. And it turns out that there's an infinite amount of those things in the world, be it alcohol or, any drug prohibition that we decide that we need to implement, or whether it be our attitudes towards free speech or censorship. So trust me when I say that there's nothing on earth in which I don't have an opinion about. But it's not just about my opinion, because lo and behold, I think that only having opinions is a big giant load of bullshit. You should have facts. You should have some facts. Things that people can trust in your job.
You should have facts, and you should have collaborators. So Sketchy's not just a magazine, right? It's actually a magazine. What is a magazine?
A magazine it's like a new concept. Back in the old days, like when people invented the magazine, I don't know if you've ever read an old magazine, but a magazine is a bit like the internet before the internet existed.
Oh, there's some good old ones. Remember Omni magazine?
Oh, yeah.
That was crazy.
So if you open up a magazine, it had a whole bunch of editorials. It had the occasional story. It had mailbags and stuff like that, people writing in.
Weird
have their
personal
opinions.
Section in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
Sketchy.
Weird. And a whole bunch of pop-up ads and fucking untrustworthy links. Just the kind of stuff that the internet really is, and a lot of pornography. So a magazine in the old days was kind of like our preview for the internet. But now that the internet is around, I guess that for a while we all thought, well, we don't need no stinking magazine anymore. The internet is like a magazine. But, well, you can't really feel and touch the goddamn internet yet, can you? It's not the same, Like, how many of you out there love books just the way they are? Like the old school, feel paper in your fucking hands, touch it and shit. How many of you like physical books? How many of you have books at home?
I have books at home. They're cool, I guess.
Oh, it's not to say that you're not going to have the electronic version of it.
Sure.
But in today's world, the magazine is about bridging the gap between different kinds of media. So we have obviously the internet version, like the electronic version, which you need to have.
So the podcast.
Well, no, I'm talking just PDF. So the
PDF.
magazine itself comes in a PDF form, electronic form. If you're a subscriber, you will have already received, by the time you listen to this first episode, your first issue of the Sketchy Megazine. So you already have the electronic version, but we're not just working on the electronic version. We're also doing the physical version and these cool podcasts. So every single magazine comes with 4 podcasts that we produce, and each podcast will be different topics and different kind of, let's say, little sections that we include. Just all of that is what the magazine is. It's an endless entertainment in different media formats, be they video, audio, or magazine that you read while you're taking a shit.
And all the art, all the stories, very nice. All the art, all the stories, everything that goes into Sketchy Megazine is in some way sketchy, right? This is stuff that irks us. This is stuff that your fellow artists produce. We're talking about sketchy stuff.
Well, I think that for me, the word sketchy just basically means that it's something you're not afraid to produce. It's something that you think might be controversial or a little bit edgy. And I think that we know that in today's world, like, I don't know, we're more censored than we used to be. And part of that censorship is self-censorship, where some people are afraid to post cartoons depicting, Mohammed because they're afraid they're going to be murdered. Or some people are just afraid to say stuff that might hurt or, insult others because they think that if they do so, they're going to be shamed or lambasted or what have you. So I think that there is a lot of people who are just kind of generally feeling that they don't have a safe space to just say what the fuck is on their mind and at the end of the day not necessarily get judged for it. You know what I mean?
Right, to be able to just laugh a little bit at life. Laugh at the things we think are sketchy.
Well, to say things that are fucking sketchy. Every once in a while you're going to say something that's kind of dickish or cruel or mean. And maybe you didn't mean all of it at that time. But ultimately, I think what's important in today's society is that we have a little bit more honesty. When you try to shame people for saying something that, might sound insensitive, you're guaranteeing that no one's really ever going to have an honest conversation, because who really wants to have an honest conversation if every single point is going to be analyzed to death, if they're going to be made to feel ashamed of it or forced by fucking social media or anybody else to fucking apologize for words said in the heat of the moment. And I'm like, I don't think that should be necessary. I think that you should have a fucking free area where you can just say shit, maybe you didn't mean it or whatever, but it's fine.
There's this idea floating around, it's not new, but more than ever after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, that, maybe we shouldn't offend people. Maybe we should be more politically correct. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's this attitude that if you don't rock the boat, that essentially the peace will, we can experience peace in our time. And I think that that's the same kind of limited, narrow vision that basically led to the kinds of conflicts that we had in the 21st or 20th century. Look, if I was to tell you what was the biggest problem with Europe for a long time, and I would say it's this notion that they thought, well, as long as we tolerate one another, then it'll be all fine. But really, toleration is just to say, listen, I'm going to let you do whatever the fuck you're doing, and as long as it doesn't really get in my face. But that's not a reality. I mean,
well, it eventually boils and reaches ahead,
yeah,
and really doesn't end well.
Well, eventually there is a clash. I mean, eventually, the more individuals are separated from one another, the more likely they are to kind of diverge in completely different directions, and all of a sudden they'll intersect again, and maybe that intersection isn't exactly a fucking peaceful one.
Well, can you imagine a world where we argued a lot more, the level of discourse and debate was way higher, but we fought less because we got our anger and our conflicting viewpoints out in this safe world of ideas and art and conversation and debate? How much more peaceful would life be?
Well, it's weird because
it certainly would be outwardly more peaceful.
Do we have a world that's now safer to discuss ideas or not? And I would say that it's kind of a world that's in flux. It's changing. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I would say that the bright-eyed me would say, this is a world in which ideas can really stand on their own. But actually I find that these days it's less about ideas and more about identity politics. Like whatever group is able to galvanize themselves and have a stronger bully pulpit from which they can fucking scream whatever issues they have, on their minds at any given time, or shame whatever group that they don't like, or just feel morally superior. I think that there's plenty of individuals not willing to engage with others and more likely to engage with their own echo chamber. They want other people to believe that everything they fucking do And as soon as you don't, they want to marginalize and cut you out of this. This is why dialogue is essentially non-existent anymore, because we can live in a world in which everyone that surrounds us, all of our little online friends and support groups, can believe the exact same fucking thing that we do. So why is there a need for dialogue anymore? You don't need to fucking hang around with anybody that disagrees with you. Isn't that great?
Oh, yeah, that sounds wonderful.
That sounds like a fucking kind of wonderful place to live, where everybody agrees.
Sounds like it's really important to fit in those groups more than anything else. So let's rewind for a second. I mean, you're a podcaster. You've had a good run with The Good Atheist and Mixed Martial Art podcasts.
Been podcasting for 8 years.
Since he was born.
I've done over 500 podcasts in that period of time.
That's insane.
The total amount of times that all of those podcasts have been downloaded probably exceed about 2 million times.
Wow.
So there's a lot of motherfucking ears that have heard
and
that.
For those who aren't familiar with Jacob 14's work, these are not lightweight podcasts. These are hour-long, intensively researched religious podcasts or about atheism, dealing with some heavy subject matter. And I guess before that it was mostly fight linker type
Oh, well,
stuff,
you see,
MMA.
I did, it's like sports casting.
Sports casting, that's a bit lighter.
It's much lighter. And plus, you can be a jackass, you can talk out of your butt, and nobody's going to do fact-checking, because it's all opinion-based.
Right.
You're like, who's going to knock out which motherfucker? Who cares at the end of the day?
So my first question for you is, what is it about podcasting that you like doing, or maybe that you're successful at, that makes you successful at it? How do you gather so many listeners?
I guess that if there's one thing I'm good at is just talking my fucking ass off. At the end of the day, really, when you're listening to a show, what you want is someone who can talk and entertain you. Everything else doesn't really matter. I mean, most of the people who are going to be listening to us are going to be working out, they're in their car, they're bored as shit. They just need someone.
You better not be doing anything sketchy.
Yeah, well, don't do anything that's really requires a lot of your concentration, because that is a mistake. But I think that mostly we live in a society in which there are a lot of people out there that are kind of lonely. They're not engaged in the kind of intense, stimulating discussions that they wish they were engaged in.
Well, this is, a lot of us live in cities, most of us do, and a lot of us have a commute where you'd rather be listening to something interesting, kind of a mental magazine, or reading something interesting, rather than just listening to the sound of the bus brakes. That nice little moment in the day where you have a laugh and you're absorbing some content you actually like. I think that's, for me anyways, what podcasts do
here's
and
the truth.
audiobooks.
I produce them, but if anybody listens to podcasts, that would be you, sir.
Yeah, and I
You're a
listen to
listener.
podcasts that surround that center around subjects I like. Of course, the world of tech. The world of movie making, the world of science. These are all things that, and I'm a fanboy, so Apple Podcasts, those are things that I like to listen to because I get my content through my ears.
I know, I never do this. I don't fucking listen to podcasts. Can't stand them.
There you go. I can't stand them.
I don't like them.
So another question I had is, why did you decide to create the magazine with other artists? So you're an artist too. You draw. A lot of people have seen your artwork on the cover of the DVD for The Good Atheist.
Or the book.
Or the book. The Jake rewrote the Bible.
Oh, right. This is the first episode.
Right.
Nobody knows that
Nobody
I wrote
knows.
a book. I rewrote the Bible. No big deal.
Right.
No biggie.
From an atheist perspective, so you can imagine how
Well, it's more like
high the fidelity
It's
is.
a satirical retelling of the Bible. That's the best way that I can put it. Satirical, not in the sense that I make anything up, but in the sense that the way it's written is not intended to sacralize it. Let's just say I'm just trying to put the story out there. That's all.
When you did that work, that took at least a year, maybe
2 years.
2
yeah,
years.
2 years.
That was a one-man show. You did all the art, you did all the writing, you had some help editing and such, but why did you decide to include other artists in the production of Sketchy Megazine? Because the first edition, if you haven't seen it already, features some pretty cool art from a couple other guys.
Well, over the years of doing my Good Atheist and other podcasts, I've kind of gotten fans, and sometimes you get a fan that has just as much fucking talent as you do.
Heyo.
So what happened is that, obviously the guys that had the most talent, we talked and we established friendships, and some of them I started working on projects with. Now the thing about me is that I have endless ideas, right? Every day I come up with like 2 or 3 ideas. This is my curse. And the one thing that I do know about a lot of artists, say visual artists, is that they don't necessarily have a ton of ideas. Visual artists are people who obsess about, their art. They'll be drawing every day. They'll be trying to, just develop new techniques or whatever. So within that time, you're not always developing storylines and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, look, I've got a ton of ideas. I know a shitload of talented artists, and I'm very good at organizing things. So I thought, I could bring this all together. And also, let me just say that when you're trying to make a magazine, you don't want to do all the work, okay? It's a lot of work, a fucking magazine. There's the first one, Sketchy Megazine, Volume 1, that's almost 30 pages worth of content. That is, that's a quarter or fifth of a fucking book right there working on a magazine. So I thought, why don't I bring a few other artists in? All I got to do is pay them a little bit, and then they'll produce some fucking fantastic work. So over time, as the magazine grows, I can bring in more artists, more money that comes in, because there are so many talented artists that want to work and that no one wants to pay them. That's the reality, dude.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to pay people for shit.
Even a small token amount is enough to justify, sometimes getting up in the morning and putting effort into producing some art.
Well, do you want to know the 2 biggest fucking complaints that every artist, every cartoonist, comic book artist, what do you think their biggest complaint is?
That's tough. I don't know. It's all been done, or
Number 1, not getting paid on time.
Ouch.
There are almost no fucking artists that get paid right when they're supposed to get paid.
What?
They get jerked around for a fucking long time. Sometimes they never get paid, or if they do, it'll be like a fucking year later. It's ridiculous.
In what job or profession is that acceptable?
There are not many professions where you would accept that.
Right.
Hey, we want you to work for a few months as an administrator for this company, but at the end of it, we don't really know we're going to pay you.
Listen, we'll call you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you solve all these equations and then maybe we'll pay you? Maybe.
Right. And then if we can sell the results, then we'll think of giving you a cut. But we're going to pay ourselves first.
And there's not a lot of jobs where the majority of the people applying for these jobs are going to be offered zero money to have their work displayed. Whatever the fuck that means. I get this offer all the time. Be like,
oh, we're going to show off your work. It'll be good for your career as an artist.
Not bloody likely.
How about you pay me, and that'll be great for my career as an artist.
Well, there's a lot of...
wait, what's the other complaint?
Okay, so the other complaint is that they don't get a lot of respect.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
See, the other thing, too, that I wanted in my magazine was that it's true that the artists that I work with, obviously I'm giving them a bit of a mandate. I'm saying, I want you to work on something that's kind of controversial, and once in a while we might have a few ideas kicking around. But the most important thing is for them to have their own artistic freedoms. They have to have their own space and their own choices. I'm not the kind of guy that says you have to do it exactly like this, blah 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 blah.
But you give them enough of an idea what is expected, that they have some constraints. Because I know a few artists who think that the blank page is like the bane of their existence. They could draw anything, or they could sculpt anything, or whatever. But having a purpose, having a specific thing to work on, is often enough to get them going.
Well, see, this is why I said this is the easy part for me, because I could find an artist and I'm like, I have a few ideas. Here's what I'd like for you to do, and what kind of input can you bring? Well, a good example would be the Skeptic Al comic book. This is one of the features in the magazine. It's at the back of the magazine. This is something I worked on with another artist, and he's a very talented comic book artist. Now, his skill is in character creation, right? Like character design and character integrate, whatever. This is not my strength. My strength is writing storyline and, coming up with plot lines, that kind of stuff. So when I was working with him, I said, okay, here are the characters, here are their names, but I didn't have an idea of what they would look like. He's the one who brought in that sort of like the design elements. And the thing is, when you do a story like a graphic novel or a comic book, even how a character looks will kind of influence that character himself. Like,
right.
So I wanted another artist to provide kind of like different information that I might not be aware of. I didn't want every element to be chosen by me. I wanted someone else to bring like
the personality,
just
look, the feeling,
or even more than that is when we write a script together. Sometimes he'll say, I don't really like this. Can you reword this? And we'll have like back and forth about it. And that's, I think, is what's important, because if it's just you're never having to fucking challenge yourself.
Right.
You're never having to make compromises. You're always, everything is the way you wanted it. Well, that's not always a good story or a good storytelling tool. Sometimes you need your own limitations. So working with other artists, they give me different tools to work with, like characterizations, different ideas. So I get to not work alone, which is fucking nice.
So on the outside, you could say Sketchy Megazine is a force to represent free speech and fight this suppression of ideas that's happening all over the world. But on the inside, it's really like an artist's workshop, essentially.
Yeah,
It's a grab bag of different ideas. Yeah, we were talking earlier about Magazine 1, Volume 1, having sort of a, what is it, a swing kind of feeling to it.
Yeah, it's got an
jazzy, old school.
It almost seems like it's 1940s, 1950s look.
Kind of a spy theme a little bit. But Volume 2 will probably be quite different.
Yeah, Volume 2 we might be doing science fiction. There's a number of genres that I want to experiment with. And this is another thing about Sketchy Magazine. It's not just one type of magazine. We're going to be doing a lot of different genres because, again, I'm teaming up with different artists. Some artists I'm teaming up with are poets. We're going to do a fucking magazine that's all poetry. So it's just, what I'm doing is I'm trying to go out and I'm trying to find different artists that want to work together and that, and who believe that fundamentally the most important thing about art is that it has no real limitations. That it doesn't matter if if it offends somebody, it's actually doing something fucking right for a change. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want easy, safe shit. That's for another magazine. Sketchy, I want just all the fucking cutting edge, daring motherfucking shit.
Listen to Sketchy, read Sketchy. You'll build up your mental immune system.
Well, look, I mean, one of the podcasts we're going to be doing, we're going to do the history of free speech. This is going to be a hell of a long podcast. We're talking maybe 2 hours. We're going to cover all the way from Rome to medieval England and the Magna Carta, all the way to the invention of the printing press, to fucking the Declaration of Independence and beyond. So we're going to be talking a lot about the history of people saying whatever the fuck they want and how brief and limited and special this fucking period of time is and why it's so fucking precious.
Right, how it's not something you're born with. It's something you have to fight for.
It definitely is.
It's a right you have to exercise or else it will be squashed.
It can be squashed in a way, it can be washed
Stamped
away,
out.
like the same way it can be eroded, like the Grand Canyon. Somebody can just carve a big fucking chunk through it and it can become utterly meaningless and pointless. So, as the one right that I think trumps almost every other right that you have, because without the ability to speak about your rights, all your rights are meaningless. Like, this is your most important one. If you can't fucking speak your mind, there are no other rights to speak of, really. Fundamentally. So that's the reason why we're always so fucking up at arms. And Sketchy will always take a pretty fucking fundamentalist stand. that might be the most fundamentalist thing we could say about free speech.
Right.
We do not really believe in any barriers or limitations. And the podcast we're going to be talking about, we'll deal with that. What are the harm principle, the offense principle, all the ways, the philosophical underpinnings of free speech and its own limitations. So we're going to be talking about that. But we have a ton of sections that we've been designing.
Maybe we'll wrap this little intro up in a minute, but why don't we just briefly walk through some of the segments that we're planning on producing on Sketchy.
Are we doing it in any particular order?
Well, okay, so we'll start with your editorial idea, this notion of a more heavy subject, like the history of free speech, or maybe some other themes, patriotism, celebrity.
All the stories in the magazine reflect themes that we're going to be talking about. So, obsession with celebrity, patriotism. We'll even do a little section on inductive and deductive reasoning, which is one of the stories has a little kind of joke about that.
Drug prohibitionism, your favorite subject.
Right. So
Sketchy.
So for that section, these are all the kind of hot topics, editorial parts that I'm very interested in.
Right. But we got some other ones, like
more fun stuff.
Talking about the news that's happening. We're aware of some groups of people who insist on living in the past. We hear about ISIS today, but
they're not the Boko Haram or whoever they are.
One of many examples. Yeah. So we have a little segment.
Al-Shabaab. There's fucking tons of these fucking guys.
With a little segment we like to call "What Century Is This?"
Right.
Where we're going to be referring to news that should have occurred hundreds of years ago,
but is occurring today. We're also going to do movie, TV, and book reviews. So if I'm
not necessarily contemporary stuff too. There's a lot of gold from the early days of film and television.
Well, I mean, the stuff I'm going to be talking about is stuff that I think is noteworthy. I'm not going to be talking about Big Bang Theory, okay?
Right.
Unless it's the shit all over it. No, we're going to be talking about the good stuff. So we're going to be talking about not only the works themselves, but also the people behind them. So we're going to be talking about guys like Orson Welles or Norman Lear or all the kinds of people that really influence these types of mediums. We're also going to have just a section on just pure history. So there's a lot of historical figures that I feel have been totally fucking ignored, man, like for a variety of reasons. Or unknown civilizations. Like, do you know that we have never figured out the Etruscan language? The Etruscans were the ones, by the way, that the Romans copied. They copied the aqueducts. They copied many of their religious gods, not just from the Greeks, but here's a whole civilization that we know so little about. So we're going to be talking about them and just all kinds of lost civilizations and lost historical figures.
What about book reviews? In the margins.
In the margins is not just where we're going to be talking about books, but we're also going to be talking about the authors themselves. Because to understand a book, you must understand the author. If you've only ever read an author's book and never read their biography, you're fucking not doing yourselves any favors here. You got to understand the person before you can understand the work.
One of the things I like to do is when I listen to older jazz, older classical music, I try to find out a little bit about how that music was controversial for the time. I find it makes it a lot more interesting if you're listening to some, I don't know, Mozart, or you're listening even to some old Oscar Peterson. If you can understand, don't just hear it or see it as kind of an old style that everybody has copied since, but if you see it as shattering the rules of the time, it becomes way more enriching as an experience.
Well, I think the biggest and most important element that we're going to be talking about in Sketchy is we're going to give you context, motherfucker. If you're reading a book, what is the context of this book? If you're listening to a song, what's the fucking context? This is the thing that we've lost in society, ladies and gentlemen. We don't understand context. So, if anything, Sketchy Magazine is about providing you a little bit of goddamn context.
But, it's not all heavy stuff. Once in a while, I'm going to chime in with my own current hobby, mixology. And we call this section Spirited Science.
Well,
we're going to get a little tipsy. We'll give you some nice drink recipes.
Our
a lot of them
here isn't just a mixologist; he's an amateur scientist here. So he's
Right.
going to be dropping some science along with his mixology.
We're going to give you a nice cocktail recipe. We're going to drink that cocktail live
Loudly
and loudly. And while we're doing that, we're going to attempt to talk about some science. So it's going to be pretty fun.
Yeah. It's kind of like drunk history, but
Right.
with science.
Drunk science, the best kind.
The only kind.
We're going to generate a lot of curious hypotheses. I think that's as much as we could say.
We're also going to have actually musicians on the show. So I know quite a few musicians, and I've wanted to include music as a portion because I think that music is one of the, the big threes of art. You know what I mean? Like if you were to describe the visual, the auditory, and well, I don't know the other one. I guess it would be acting or whatever. The emotional, or I'm not quite sure how you would describe like that aspect of art.
Right.
But you know what I mean. So all of these elements are kind of covered. And what else do we have? We're also going to have we're going to have mailbags. So fans and people who want to ask questions, we're going to answer all questions that come our way. So we'll have those kinds of segments.
Well, basically
on
the
show as well.
system that's being set up or has been set up to fund the Sketchy Megazine is something called Patreon. How did you come across Patreon? How's it different from what you did before?
Well, when I wrote the book, the Bible Stories book, I did that on Indiegogo. Well, I did it on Kickstarter as well, but unfortunately, Kickstarter, you couldn't use it as a Canadian for a while.
Oh.
But the problem with Kickstarter and Indiegogo is that let's say you have an idea for a project and you do a one-time fundraising. Well, the problem with one-time fundraising is that sometimes you might run out of money or the project might go awry. Or, sometimes like a project can take a really fucking long time.
Or goals might change, and trying to buffer this huge piece of work up over the course of, a year or two?
Right.
Can take a really long time. So what's different about Patreon, especially for our listeners?
Well, the great thing about Patreon is that, number one, is it's kind of a continual relationship that you're forming with someone. Obviously, it comes from patronage, which is this ancient idea, if you want, where artists would seek the patrons, rich individuals. Now, obviously, in the medieval time, it'd be like kings, dukes, people with money. But nowadays, the interesting thing about patronage is that you don't need one person giving you thousands of fucking dollars. Instead, you need thousands of people giving you $1. So the cool thing about Patreon is that this is a system where people can go on and pay based on certain goals. So with Sketchy Magazine, what we decided to do was that you would pay $1, let's say, for the basic subscription PDF
electronic version
per magazine. This is
Right.
not per month or whatever. It's per magazine.
So when you produce it, they get it and then they pay.
Exactly.
But what if you
they
decide
get it
to produce,
only after I pay?
What if you decide to produce 1,000 in a month? Big scam. What
Right.
happens then?
Well, see, that's actually that's the smart thing about Patreon, because people can put a limit. Obviously, if you, some guy could be like, "Hey, I'm going to charge you $1, but I'm going to release 1,000 things." Wow, I charged everyone $1,000.
What a scam!
What a scam! Evidently,
So there's built-in
there are
safeguards
built-in
against
safeguards.
that. So
And some people might be like, well, for instance, I really want to support this person quite a bit per magazine at the beginning. But then they might be like, well, if he's already done 5 or 6, he may not need me as much.
Right.
So again, it allows people to
choose their limit. Right.
And the great thing about Patreon too is that the way we set up the Sketchy Magazine is that it's really up to listeners to decide when the next one comes out. Because until we reach, let's say, even 200 subscribers, this is a yearly magazine.
Right.
So we're not going to be releasing them very often if there's not a lot of interest.
But there's a ladder, and
there's a
the more
ladder,
you
like-
get, more subscribers you get,
Right.
the more often they come out.
Past, I think, 300, then we'd be about twice a year. Then when we reach about 1,000, then we'd be every 3 months. And then once we reach 2,000 and more, then we'd be a monthly magazine.
Yep.
But 2,000 subscribers, I mean, that's going to take some time. We're being realistic here.
Yeah, but I think I said it before. I think Sketchy is a lot broader of a subject than some of your atheist work and mixed martial art.
Well, yeah, I've been in niche markets for a long time.
You've been in niche markets and have tapped those quite well. But Sketchy is different too, because I think a lot of people believe in it, and they're not just curiously interested in the subject. They really believe in free speech, and they genuinely are offended when it gets stamped out.
But I mean, even then, like, we're making Sketchy sound like some serious magazine where we're just just fighting the man and everything's just so really just serious. No, it's not that serious. Okay, we don't take ourselves too seriously. And really, Sketchy was originally intended as a place for me to publish a lot of my short story ideas or comics, like one-time little comic ideas that I had going on in my head. And I mean, if it ends up being controversial, that's great. But ultimately, it was just about again expressing myself in a media that let's say is not a book. Here's what I discovered. People don't really read books no more. I wrote a book, and I realized that it's a hard sell. But people like to read fucking small shit. This is why you go on the internet. You read an article here. You watch a 5-minute video. You have no fucking attention span, world. This is what you're like now. So I understand. I get it. This is why I made a magazine, because you have no fucking attention span.
Bite-sized.
It's bite-sized.
Where can we find the Patreon site? How do we get hooked up with that?
Well, if you go to www.patreon.com/sketchy, then you can go to the Patreon page and you can sign up there. We have 3 different sign-up packages. The first one is $1. Gets you the PDF, and that's your basic one. And if that's all you can afford, that's fine. Please, the more people are subscribed, the better. And we want you to go tell your friends if you think that they'll like it. $1 per magazine. We think that that's pretty fucking square, right?
That basically allows people to support you and the works that are coming out, but also the other artists who contribute.
Right. Well, that's
Jake
the thing.
wants to be a good patron himself of the arts.
I can't pay them unless I get paid. So the more I get from the magazine, the more more artists I can bring on board. And like I said, the one thing that artists fucking hate is that they get disrespected and never get paid. I don't want to not pay my dudes. Like I already asked them for the first magazine. I'm like, can you give me this one for free? But the second magazine, there is zero fucking chance that I'm not going to give them money for it, because I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not going to fucking be like, oh, I'm going to expose you on my magazine.
So the ads people are going to notice in Sketchy Magazine are humorous, right?
Well, yes.
Are they genuine or are they humorous?
Well,
like Bogsmith's gin. Can I go out and get a case or a can of Bogsmith's?
No, we'll never sell alcohol. But our hope is in the future, if any of those satirical ads really get popular, we may make products and like maybe T-shirts or. I even think about writing a workout manual for that K25 routine. I mean, there's tons of plans. It really does depend on how the reaction is from everybody. Like we will leave it up to the subscribers to decide. Like ultimately, you can speak through your own patronage. That's how you speak. You're like, well, I want to support this one. Well, good. There's a way for you to do it. And the more people who support it, the more that we're going to work on this. So the great thing about Sketchy is I have left this up to fucking people to support. And if they decide that it's a fucking big pile of fucking crap, then I'm going to make one a year, and that is it. But I have a feeling that most of you are going to want more. That's my feeling.
Vote with your patronage. Through patronage, you have a voice.
Well, that's the neat thing. I mean, it's like democracy through money.
Right.
Which is kind of the sad truth.
That sounds like a horrible way to run a country.
Man,
it's kind of the way it works.
Let me tell you, all the citizens really are united.
Right. Am I right? So
money talks.
Just one last point we should mention. This is the free podcast, right?
That's
We're going to do one of these a month approximately.
Well,
we'll see how it goes.
No, not one a month. One a magazine.
One a magazine. Gotcha.
So every time a new magazine comes out, we're going to release a free podcast that's going to give a preview about what's coming up and that kind of stuff. We'll also talk about how when free speech really started to let's say, matter, which was after the invention of the printing press, which is when a person's speech could go from, say, just one voice to having tens of thousands of different voices. So the history of the printing press is really the short history of our own introduction to, you know, the real power of free speech. And then later on, we'll also cover the European wars of religion, which were completely related to people expressing their own individual ideas. And that was about, hey, maybe the Catholic Church isn't awesome. Yeah, well, that was a free speech issue. And then we'll also cover, in America, the place that always loves to boast that they're the defenders of free speech, little do they know that the second president of the United States almost destroyed their First Amendment. So we'll be talking about that one, the crazy Aliens and Sedition Act, which almost destroyed your First Amendment. So that's going to be the first show that we're going to be doing.
And we also have kind of an after dark, like really sketchy podcast as well.
Well, see, this one's less history. This one's more, we're going to be doing a little bit of that drinking and talking about some
mostly spirited science. So
but we'll be talking about all the different things going on in the news.
What do we call it?
Which one?
What's the title of the after dark version?
Oh, Sketchy as Fuck.
Sketchy as Fuck.
Once the next magazine's going to be released, there's going to be a whole bunch of other fucking topics that we're going to be talking about. I mean, just a nutty amount of shows, really.
Nutty. It's
just
a nutter.
Nutty. But, like we said, all of this is contingent on fan reaction. So, if fan reaction's good, all of a sudden, I guess it's going to force us to do more shows.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. We'd be forced. Of course, they'd be paying us.
Coerced.
So.
Through money.
Through money and success. What a horrible world that would be.
No, I mean, we don't want to give the wrong impression. This is a shoestring budget, but we think it can grow into something great.
Yeah, well,
great for everyone.
The reason we kept Sketchy so cheap is we ultimately believed that it was just a matter of numbers, right? It's a numbers game. We have a few thousand subscribers, and it changes the whole fucking game. So why not make it $1? I mean, sure, it's going to take longer for us to get to our goal, but I think that once we achieve that goal, the limits will be unfathomable.
The reach is more important, especially at the beginning. I just offend a large swath of people.
I sure fucking hope so.
Sorry.
Send us your letters.
Sorry, not sorry.
See, we're one of those magazines that want you to send
I can't wait
letters.
For us to get our first angry tweet or angry letter. Oh, it's going to be glorious.
It could even be a segment.
We're going to have so much fun with that.
We haven't even thought about this segment.
Angry mailbag.
Yep. Angry mailbag. There's many possibilities.
Perfect.
But this is not a magazine that plays it safe.
Nope.
So the future is bright. With that, my name is Jacob14.
I'm T-Bod.
Welcome to Sketchy Magazine. We'll hope we'll catch you later.